Okay, you're all set.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's session of the Ad Hoc Reappraisal Committee. I'm Christina McEntee, and I will be facilitating tonight's session. Next slide. Tonight's agenda is to listen to public comment and the Racial Equity Action Plan overview. We also hear the community input survey final report out. And then we'll hear from the property assessment team for their part 3 of their presentation. Next slide. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
Not on the public input platform.
All right. If we don't have anybody signed up, then we can move to the next agenda item. And this is our Racial Equity Action Plan overview. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Eden of the Office of Equity and Human Rights for Buncombe County.
Thank you, Christina. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see all of your faces. I'm here this afternoon to share with you an overview of the Racial Equity Action Plan, but not so much an overview in the way of, let me tell you everything about the REAP. You're going to make some connections tonight between the Racial Equity Action Plan, the strategic plan, your resolution and charge as a committee, and how the Racial Equity Action Plan ties into all of that. So I just wanted to, I know we had a conversation the last time I was here about racial equity and the action plan, just again, high level, but this time I wanted to make it a little bit more specific to what you all are doing. So got a couple slides tonight that I hope will do that. Next slide, please. So here's our overview for this evening. We're going to do an equity versus equality level set. If you all remember, this is one of the things that I talked about in our last meeting or the last time I was with you. Then get into the Racial Equity Action Plan or the REAP and give an overview of that. And then, as I was mentioning, specifically talk about the REAP and tax reappraisal and our charge here. And then I want to close by looking ahead and thinking about not only what I will bring to you on March 9th, but what other tools or strategies for working from an equity lens you all might want or I might provide, or any ideas that you want to be able to share with me or Christina or Burnett in the days and weeks ahead. Anything that you have, I want to make sure that I provide those for you, because I think it's one thing for me to get up here or on here, I'm not really up anywhere, get on here in front of you and go over, this is what equity is, this is what it means to the county, this is what it means to our community, and say, okay, now move from an equity lens, but not provide any tools, any strategies, any opportunities to kind of practice and see what this looks like, so that when you're getting into your main work of creating suggestions and so on for the Board of Commissioners, you will be able to have operationalized some of these ideas that I've been giving you. So that's where I'm leading towards tonight. Next slide. So I'm going to bring us back to this. I know that you all have seen this a couple times, but I just want to make sure that everyone sees kind of the clear centering between what your committee charge is and equity and the county's Racial Equity Action Plan. So there are a few pieces highlighted. I'll just read it off very quickly. It's a short slide. So in recognizing that legally required tax assessments of real property and the reappraisal process are confusing and largely misunderstood, and in light of recent charges that the process is not equitable, this board desires to create an ad hoc committee, which is all of you. And then, whereas the goals of the committee would align with the county's Racial Equity Action Plan, including 1, to identify citizen concerns, 2, to provide guidance on future assessments, and 3, provide input into equity concerns. So from my work in the Office of Equity and Human Rights, I want to be able to support you and provide you the resources and information that you need to be able to do this, particularly in its alignment with the REAP. Next slide. Is this my video slide?
Yeah, it'll take a second for it to load here. Here we go.
It's fine. Okay. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, great. So the last time we discussed equity and equality, we went over a little bit about what it is. I just want to make sure I drill down again and explain how equity and equality are different. I know that sometimes we use these things interchangeably, but they're not actually the same. And so I want to highlight and reinforce that it's not the racial equality action plan, meaning that simply treating everyone the same is not what the goal is. What we're looking to do is create systems that create the same outcomes for everyone, the same positive outcomes for everyone. So in the equality slide, you see they're all standing on the same size crate. That's equal, it's fair treatment, but you can see that not everyone has the same access to a positive outcome. However, on the right, the equity, you see that rates are now stacked and staggered in a way that everyone is able to experience this positively. So I'm going to show a very short, it's like 2 minutes and 30-second video about equity and equality. And so this is a video that we share through our office with the Equity and Inclusion Work Group in coffee chats. So the very first coffee chat that the Equity and Inclusion Work Group does, which are short workshops over the lunch break that tackle equity issues. This was the video that is shown. So this is a foundational video that comes from our team. So I just wanted to share it with all of you. So you can play when it is.
Today, we are talking about equity and equality. But you might be wondering, wait, aren't these the same thing? They look the same, they sound similar, so aren't they the same? No, in fact, they're really different concepts, even though a lot of us get the two confused. So let's break them down. You probably already know what we mean when we say equality. We're talking about two things that are the same or have a similar value. When we treat two people or two groups of people equally, we make sure that they have or get the same things. For example, if I want to give Betty some apples, then I need to give Ben the same number of apples to treat them with equality. Along the same lines, if I want to give the nursing program a budget increase, then I need to make sure that I give the culinary arts program the same budget increase to treat them with equality. That makes sense. But that's not the same thing as equity. Equity can be defined as giving everyone what they need to be successful. In other words, it's not giving everyone the exact same thing. And here's where the difference between equity and equality really come in, because it's important to remember that if we give everyone the exact same thing, expecting that we'll make people equal, it assumes that everyone started out in the same place. So here's an example. In this instance, we give everyone the exact same box, we treat them with equality, so that they can see over the fence. Well, that's great for the person on the left because they were already taller, but it's not so great for the person on the right who still can't see over the fence. From an equity perspective, we wouldn't want everyone to have the same size box because everyone isn't the same height to start out with. With an equity mindset, we would get everyone what they need to raise them up to the same level. Here's another example. With equality in mind, we can treat everyone the same and give them all the same bike, but that doesn't really help the person on the left who can't ride that kind of bike, or the person in the middle that is too small for that bike. So when we think about this situation with equity in mind, equity tells us that we need to give everybody a different kind of bike so they can all enjoy a bike ride. As you might guess, this is where the concept of fairness gets tricky for some folks. We often think that being fair means that everybody gets the same thing, and that's what we were taught when we were growing up. But fairness really only works when we're all the same to start out with. So this is a new idea for many of us to think about. There is this great American saying that people just need to work hard enough and pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. It's this idea that everyone can be successful if you just work hard enough. Well, that's a lot easier to do when some of us were born with longer arms to pull up those bootstraps, or maybe we were given longer bootstraps when we bought our boots. So let's think about moving away from the bootstrap idea and instead think about shoes. There is a quote by Nahid Dasani that goes, "Equality is giving everyone a shoe, but equity is giving everyone a shoe that fits."
Okay, thank you so much for that, Burnett. So before we move on to the next slide, I just want to underscore why I wanted to show that to everyone today. It's because so far we've been hearing a lot of educational pieces from individuals and from tax assessment, Keith and his team. And we're going through it with processes, procedures. This is how we do it. This is what we do. This is how we strive to create equality in the practice. But when you all have the opportunity to make your recommendations to the board, you get to think creatively in the ways that the process might be more equitable, what suggestions might be. And so I just wanted to reframe those two ideas for you all. Not to say that our speakers haven't had equity in mind, but since it has been more educational, informational, not so much you all as the committee getting a chance to think about what your recommendations concretely might be and how to make those recommendations, I wanted to put that back out on your mind. So next slide. Okay, so the REAP and the strategic plan. So here's a chart that shows you kind of how we get to the Racial Equity Action Plan from the 2025 strategic plan county. So equity is one of the three focus goals. And so those are equity, operational excellence, and resources. So if you drill down under equity, you see on the left, there's a number of aspects of equity. On the right, of course, is racial equity, which has a racial equity action plan as its guiding document. However, I really do want to make clear for you all and for the community that's listening, that just because we lead with race doesn't mean that we are doing it to the exclusion of recognizing the needs that other protected classes and marginalized groups have. So here are just a few examples. So it's age, gender expression, sexual orientation or preference, ability, so on. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that the Racial Equity Action Plan will serve as a template for how we'll move forward with addressing equity across the board and within the intersections that individuals have. But that is the connection between the and the actual strategic plan. Next slide. Okay, so here are just a few points about the REAP that lead us into our next conversation. So the REAP in general, and there are links to this. I believe that after I'm done, Christina or Burnett will put a link to the Racial Equity Action Plan PDF in the chat. But the Racial Equity Action Plan outlines 101 discrete actions, each pertaining to addressing equity needs within the county, meaning county government, and Buncombe County at large. And so, as you can imagine, there are a number of very discrete, finite, specific actions that are put into this Racial Equity Action Plan that was adopted by our Board of Commissioners in order to move us forward across the county and a number of metrics towards a more equitable community. And so it was created by county staff, also by community input, and the Equity and Inclusion Work Group, as well as formal board adoption. The accountability structures, timelines, feedback opportunities, and an equity dashboard will be made public to the Buncombe County community. I think that's very important for all of you to know as members of your community, as you're sharing what happens in this committee, with this group, and other efforts that we do across the county, that we're anticipating in late July-ish that we will have an equity dashboard up that will track the REAP actions, and many of those actions connect to what our boards and commissions are doing. So this is the path that I'm taking. But I want you all to know that this will be an open and transparent process by which feedback will be taken from the communities. You will see our timelines, you'll see the processes that we make. And Along with county staff efforts, the REAP is forwarded by the actions and recommendations of our boards and commissions, which is one of the reasons that one of the actions in the REAP is to diversify our boards and commissions. So in order to have a more robust and representative voice on our boards and commissions, that is in and of itself one of our goals. And so I want you all to realize that when you all are doing this work, you're actually doing work that supports not only the REAP, but also our strategic plan. Next slide. So here are a couple of examples that connect REAP to tax appraisal and the tax appraisal process. So again, I'm not going to get too drilled down into this because I know my time is limited, but these are two headings in the REAP. Again, you can look at the PDF. One is one that I have here. There are many, but I just pulled these two. Quality of life, improving quality of life outcomes through racial equity initiatives, and equity as accountability, which is instituting organizational policies and processes that ensure equity and accountability across the county. So within those, there are several action steps. So you see under the first, it's improve housing outcomes for the most impacted communities, and below, establish organizational equity and accountability processes to increase capacity to make data-informed decisions and develop equitable policies and procedures for Buncombe County. Now, the first one might seem very obvious to the work that you all are doing. We're looking for ways to improve the housing outcomes for individuals and neighborhoods that have been most marginalized, most negatively impacted. But there are also the two underneath, which speak more to processes. And I think that, we want to think about both of those. So the processes and being able to suggest process changes or policy changes to our board and be able to have those conversations with Keith and his team, they speak to these two specifically. So developing equitable policies and procedures speaks to the resolution and how charges are made, that the actual process and procedure weren't equitable. And so we're looking to make sure that that is what we are doing, that we're moving from an equitable place, and then establishing organizational equity and accountability processes to increase capacity to make data-informed decisions. So data and information and education has been a big part of this process to date. So this is very important to ensuring equity and accountability. So is there more data that we need to gather on a regular basis? Is there a way that we change the way that data is presented? We've talked about visibility and transparency in the process. How can we let our community members and residents know what's happening and how the data is being used? So there are a number of places across the REAP that may or may not look specific to a board or commission, but the work that you all do is highly important. Next slide. So I'll open it for questions, comments, or thoughts, but I do want to talk about goals for the next time. So for the next time, I'm looking to help you all answer, how do we do it, right? So the next thing that I want to bring to you all as far as a county resource is our Buncombe County Simple Racial Impact Analysis Tool. I say simple because it is a 4-question analysis that speaks to who is impacted positively, who is impacted negatively, what do we need to do to change those things. It's a very simple tool. However, for the county, a more robust tool will be coming out in April, but this tool, I think, asks questions that can get you all on generating a conversation amongst yourselves about how best to move from an equity lens. So that's one of the things that I want to lead with next time. As far as questions, comments, or thoughts, again, I'm open to taking any questions, but I would also appreciate if either tonight in the chat or in coming days, if you think of anything that you'd like to know, even if you're not quite sure how to phrase it, anything that you'd like to know, any tool, any question that you'd like to forward on to me, I want to be as specific as possible to your needs while still being general enough to open the floor to this committee's work. So I just want to make sure that you all are equipped and feel comfortable and confident with this process. And with that, I think I've hit actually I think at 11 minutes and some change. So I'm going to stop, but if anyone has a comment, I'm more than happy to take it.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll pause for just a second to see if anybody has a hand up. Any committee members have a question, comment? Melanie?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was really informative. I appreciate framing all of the process in that way. I do have a question, and it's probably too big of a question, and it might be why we're here anyway, but what does it mean to improve housing outcomes? What is that actually? How do you define that?
It is,
And that's
so what I didn't actually do was get all the way into that, but I can actually give you now, because I have it in front of me. It's my little handy dandy marching orders for the county. So I'll give you a couple that are in that, just to give you an idea. And again, when you go into, if you go into the PDF, I don't want to say that you have to, but it's actually on page 10 of the PDF. So a few of these are, I'll go with some shorter. Actually, I'll start with this one. I'll start with the bottom, which is the shortest one, but might actually be the most closely aligned with your work. So that's sustain and expand rates of BIPOC home ownership. So if we think about individuals and communities that are BIPOC communities that have been underserved, marginalized, negatively impacted, and that they're also being negatively impacted by this particular policy, that's an action step. So what I'm reading off to you are actually the action steps. And so I'm glad you asked that question. I debated whether or not to put these in, but I'll talk about this one as well. So provide BIPOC populations with access to home repair and energy efficiency services. So that doesn't speak specifically to that piece, but it does speak to something that we've heard in public comment a number of times, is that their homes are being reappraised at high values. However, there's a great need for improvements internally or updates or renovations. And so how might we think about, a suite of recommendations that's wraparound that really gets into a number of different ways that we might assist our neighbors here. And I'll just give one more. Review, okay, well, yeah, this one I think also speaks to it. There's 7 under here. But review developmental ordinances to determine if BIPOC populations are disproportionately and harmfully impacted by their application. So that is really the meat of what we're doing. Is our process in some way, or many ways, or any way, is it negatively impacting? Here, as you see, it's BIPOC populations that is called out. But again, this is our racial equity action plan. So we want to look for equity across the board with all of those all of those populations that I had in the chart on slide 4, maybe. But you want to think about how it impacts everyone in our community. And so just those 3 out of those 7 that are specific to that, Melanie, I think really speak to what this committee is doing, but those are examples of what type of actions are in there.
all right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, if there aren't any further questions or comments, thank you very much, Rachel.
Well, thanks for having me.
Great information. We'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the community input survey. That survey has been out for a couple months, and it is time we closed it on Friday the 18th. And so we have compiled the data and information, and I'm going to turn it over to Burnett to walk us through what the findings are in that survey. Also, in addition, I'll also say we did send a document in the my last email that has all of the comments from that survey. We certainly didn't expect for you all to read through all of those comments by tonight, but wanted to get it to you so that you could start looking through those over the next couple weeks before our next session. But I'll turn it over to Burnett. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Good evening, committee members. I hope everybody's doing great this evening. So real quick, we are going to review the community survey. So there's really kind of from my perspective, there's two kind of very discrete kind of elements to talk about, right? So Christina mentioned the comments, and you guys have a 30+ page Word document with all the comments. So there's a lot of material there for you guys to read. And, once again, read that at your leisure. We wanted to get that to you all to really kind of serve as a foundation or a baseline when we start moving into the kind of development of the recommendations. You guys can have those comments to draw upon to help inform, some of the stuff that we come up with together moving forward. So in addition to the quantitative elements of the survey, we also have some quantitative data that we're going to share with you guys tonight. So that's really going to be where my focus is on, just kind of walking you guys through the survey responses from a quantitative perspective. So with that in mind, let's just start really at the top and then kind of get a little bit more granular as we move through this. So as Christina mentioned, the survey has been open for a couple months now. There were roughly 1,200 plus folks that responded to the survey. There's well over 500 plus comments. You guys have evidence of that in the Word document that you received. We tried to, in the process of administering the survey, one, identify the respondent's race. So there was a question for the individual taking the survey to choose to identify a race, as well as provide a location or neighborhood in which they live. So really kind of looking at those two very discrete elements, the pie chart that you see here on the left breaks out the race or ethnicity of respondents. Looking at the results, unfortunately, the biggest category, the 58%, is made up of folks who preferred not to identify or simply didn't provide a response to that particular question. So just kind of going through then the categories of the total respondents that identified, 3% were Black, 37% were white, and roughly about 1% fell into the Hispanic category. And then there was an all other comprised of Asian individuals, Native Americans, and really pretty much all of the other categories, if you will. So that pie chart provides you guys with a kind of a racial overview of the folks that did respond. On the right, you can see the geography responses. So this, based on the individuals that did provide a neighborhood location. So there were 33% of the total respondents that gave us an address. So of those 33% of respondents, you can see where they fall out in terms of the percent of total with regards to the neighborhood. So East Asheville was the highest at roughly 10.6%. It's called 11% of the total respondents that identified are coming from East Asheville, followed by North Asheville, South Asheville, and so forth. So I'm not going to read through those to you. But I think the one takeaway for you folks from this geography of responses is that there really isn't one particular neighborhood where we saw a majority of the responses coming from. It was pretty well diversified. And that's across 27 different neighborhoods that are represented in the committee, in the survey responses themselves. All right, so that's painting the picture at 10,000 feet. What I'm gonna do is shift to engagebuncombe.com, which is the URL that's up here, and you guys have access to this. And in this is our public engagement platform. And in the platform itself are some pretty cool visuals. So I'm going to use that to walk you guys through those visuals to kind of share some of the responses. And then I've got some supplemental data that we're going to kind of go back and forth between the PowerPoint slides and the Engage Buncombe website. All right, so let me just jump over there real quick. Okay, so this is the Engage Buncombe website, right? So there's a host of different visuals in here. I'm going to start right here at the top, right? We had asked a question right off the bat that said, hey, have you ever appealed or appealed the appraised value of your house? So you can see, based on the respondents, roughly about 75% said they had not. 26% has said they have. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of dig a little bit deeper, right? Let's peel back the onion a little bit on this and see what kind of bubbles to the surface. So I've got a supplemental slide that I developed that kind of does a little bit more stratification of this data. So let me switch back to the presentation real quick. Second here. Okay. So looking a little bit deeper into that appeals question, I wanted to better understand the population of folks that did file an appeal. So that roughly 25% of the total that filed an appeal. So just kind of looking at it, my first thought was, all right, so if we look at this across these racial categories that we developed, what does that look like in terms of how many folks filed an appeal, right? So unfortunately, once again, we're seeing this no response, prefer not to answer bucket being the biggest. And really the other races, it follows the overall profile of the respondents themselves, which isn't really too surprising. So that didn't really tell me much. So then I thought, all right, well, let's look at it then in terms of percent of each race category. So for example, when you look at this middle chart here, what this middle chart is telling you is that of the folks that identified as being Black, 21% of them filed an appeal. Subsequently, for white individuals, of the folks identified as being white, 24% of white folks filed an appeal. Hispanic was the lowest at 13%, and then you can see this all other category is at 53%. So for the takeaway for me for this from that slide is, or that visual, is that when you look at white and Black individuals, it's pretty close to parity in terms of the percent of total filing an appeal. Obviously, the Hispanic number is the lowest of those categories. So that's something to keep in mind as you guys start thinking through recommendations. Once again, then, I wanted to then take another cut at, okay, what does this look like in terms of a neighborhood perspective? Are we seeing one neighborhood driving a majority of the appeals that have been filed? So this, once again, this table here on the right breaks out by neighborhood as a percent of total that filed appeals, what that looks like in terms of each neighborhood. So as an example, Northwest Asheville comprises 7.1% of the total appeals. Same for North Asheville, Shiloh and East Buncombe are at 4.9%, and so forth. Once again, the takeaway for me looking at that is we're not seeing the appeals being driven by one particular geographical area in the county. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Dwayne.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for that. This is actually some of the information that I wanted to see because this is our charge. One of the things that struck me as you were going through this, well, we have 27%. I don't know if my vision is not so well. 3%. Well, we're talking about the percentage of race category of filing for appeal.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 34% of whites, or 24% of whites and 21% of Blacks. That's based on the number of, on the left-hand column, where we have 40% white and 3.1% Black respondents.
Yeah, so let me explain, they're a little bit different. So this is looking at it saying, okay, the pie chart says, all right, so let's just say hypothetically speaking, we have 1,000 appeals that were filed. So of those 1,000 appeals, 53% are in this unidentified bucket, 3% are for Black folks, 41% are for white folks. So that looks at the total population of appeals. What the chart in the middle says, okay, so for the total appeals that were filed, total appeals that were filed the total respondents in the survey that identified as being Black, 21% of them filed an appeal. The same for white folks. So for the total individuals that identified as being white, 24% of them filed an appeal. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, from a survey standpoint, do you find it average that over half of the respondents chose not to identify? Is this normal?
Dwayne, if I told you either way, I'd be lying. I don't, why the individual chose not to identify, I don't really have any insight into that. I'm sorry.
It would really help to know what that other majority was feeling and thinking when it comes to the inequities. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I agree. It's unfortunate. That's the biggest population or the biggest category that we have here. Anybody else have any other questions on this slide? I've got a few more to share with you guys, but I'm happy to talk through any questions y'all may have as it relates to the additional appeals data. Okay, if not, I'm going to jump back then to the visuals at engagebuncombe.com. Okay, so next up, you can see here is we've got another question that we had asked in the survey. So for the individuals that did file an appeal, how difficult did you feel the process was? So what this pie chart reflects is we had a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 being it was easy to file an appeal, 5 being it was hard. So you can see this pie chart represents the percentage of folks that answered with that 1 through 5 difficulty rating. So you can see the easies were approximately 18% of the total, the 2s were a 20, the 3s were the biggest piece of the pie, so roughly a third of the people felt, well, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't difficult, right? So that's where the biggest percentage of the folks responded in that 3. You can see we had 15% at 4 and 15% at 5. So the middle category that was the biggest, with roughly pretty close to parity across the other 4. So in conjunction with that question, we ask another question, said, okay, how could we improve the ease of the appeals process? So we wanted to kind of better understand what folks thought or where they saw room for improvement in that process, right? So I'm not going to read these to you, but you can see these categories are here. The biggest one that jumped out was that on the how to appeal card, make the directions more accessible and easily understood. So once again, you guys have access to this, so you can take a look at this. Some of these questions correspond to the comments in the Word doc that you have as well too. So those two combined should really help you all flesh out or tease out some of the things that you guys see as pertinent issues based on the response data. So I'm going to keep moving through here. And if anybody has any questions, please stop me and we can talk through questions as they arise. Okay, so here is a question that was asked that if you didn't file an appeal, why did you not file? Why did you feel you didn't need to file an appeal? So the biggest response here is that roughly 30% of the folks felt that that they didn't need, the house was properly assessed. The next category is, you can see roughly a quarter of the individuals didn't know that they could file an appeal. And then you can see the next category here is that folks didn't feel comfortable filing appeal. So you can see subsequently what the responses are here as well too. So once again, this is all trying to give you guys some additional information or insight into what's driving individuals to file an appeal versus not file an appeal. All right, so then we asked a question around, do you know what your property is worth? So roughly 75% of the respondents indicated that they felt comfortable that they knew what their property value was worth, whereas 25% did not indicate they did not know what the property value was. So kind of digging down a little bit further here. So then we asked them, said, okay, if you felt like you do know what your property is worth, do you agree with the most recent appraised value of your house or property? So you can see half of the individuals indicated that the value was too high. 37% indicated that the appraised value was pretty close. And then you had a handful of individuals who felt that the appraised value was too low. And then we had this other category. So for this, I thought it would be interesting to kind of tease this out a little bit further, this idea of the appraised value of the house. So I'm going to jump back. I've got some supplemental slides to talk through this a little bit further. So let me jump back to the presentation real quick here. And we will talk about the next slide. Okay, so once again, kind of a similar approach in terms of how I stratified the data. So you can see similar kind of, I wanted to, first of all, understand it at 10,000 feet. What does this look like for the folks who said they agree with the appraised value of your property? Let me take a look at what this looks like from a race perspective at a high level in terms of the percent of total. So once again, not really too different than what we're seeing in terms of the overall survey respondents, right? So then my next step was I'm following this methodology where I'm looking at it then as a percent of each category. So once again, what this chart is saying, when you look at this, so for the folks who felt that their appraised value was too high, so 21% of the individuals who responded in the survey and identified as Black felt that their appraised value was too high. Looking at the people who identified as being white, 37% of white respondents felt their property value was too high, and 38% of Hispanic individuals felt that their property value was too high. Once again, similar approach to then identifying to see, was there a specific neighborhood that maybe boiled to the top where we're seeing individuals feeling that their property value is too high? Same story, pretty well diversified. You can see Northwest Asheville and North Asheville are at the top, and followed by Reems Creek and Shiloh are in that second category. So once again, same kind of story. We're not seeing one specific neighborhood where a majority of these individuals who felt their property value was overappraised or too high. Anybody have any questions on this one? Okay, not, I will jump back. I've got a couple more slides to share here. Let me go back to this. All right. So you can see there's also comments in here. You guys have all these comments, but there are also comments listed at the site as well too. So however you feel most comfortable, you can use the website to review comments, or you can use the Word document to review the comments as well, but they're in both places for you guys. Okay, so here's a question around what additional information could we provide to make the appraisal process easier to understand? So overwhelmingly, a majority of the folks that responded to this question indicated that additional information at the departmental website would be helpful. The next biggest category are handouts and informational flyers to be more easily understood and accessible. So you can see three biggest categories, and then roughly 20% of the people that responded felt that in-person community seminars would be helpful. Okay, so then the next question we got to was we wanted to better understand what folks that reached out and actually contacted the department. So you can see that roughly a third of the individuals indicated that they did contact the tax appraisal department, with 2/3 indicating that they didn't. So this was another area that I thought it'd be interesting to kind of tease that out a little bit further. So I did some additional stratification on this particular question on the data. Let me just share real quick that that as well. I'm going to jump over here. Okay, so what I really wanted to focus in on with this is better understanding the folks who did not contact the appraisal department, right? What does the profile of those individuals look like, or the racial or ethnic makeup of those folks look like? So once again, when you look at it, it's in terms of a percent of total, similar makeup, right? But when you look at it as a percent of each of these race categories, so 64% of Black folks indicated that they have not contacted the appraisal department. Same with white folks, almost at parity here between white and Black individuals. What is bubbling to the surface here, though, is you can see that 75% of Hispanic individuals indicated that they have not contacted the tax appraisal department, sorry, the property appraisal department. However, there is one thing that I just want to call out around that number. Yes, that is a big number, 75%. However, the Hispanic individuals that identified in the survey are very small number. So yes, that is a big number, 75%. But when you, as a percent of the total population, it's one of the smallest categories. So just want to make that out. Just want to make sure everybody understands that. Anybody have any questions on this one? Okay, if not, I'm going to jump back to this. Okay, so here's another question that we asked. It said, okay, if you did contact the tax appraisal department, how did you contact them? So phone, you can see a majority of the folks called on the phone. Roughly, it's the parity between visiting the website versus sending an email. So this is the method for how folks actually reached out and contacted the tax appraisal department. And then here's some additional questions around if they didn't, why did they not do that? So some of the folks, 50% of folks indicated that they didn't have a need to contact the department. The next biggest category here is that 26% of the folks who indicated they did not chose not to contact the tax assessment department because they didn't feel comfortable. So, once again, this is all data for you guys to kind of process, think through as you're formulating your recommendations. We asked a question around folks being, do you know if you qualify for tax exclusions? So you can see 60% did not have an understanding if they qualified versus 40 that did. So once again, all stuff to consider as you start thinking through your recommendations. And then there's just comments. So all these comments that are listed here are in your Word document as well too. That's all I have to share. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
I randomly read through a bunch of the comments, and quite a few of them seemed to me were just hopeless, despair, didn't feel like it would do any good. What's the point? Did you notice that in your calculations and putting all these numbers together? What percentage of the people that just felt utterly hopeless with the process?
So Dwayne, I did not have an opportunity to try and go through and quantify those, just because there's 30 pages of Word doc. I just didn't have the bandwidth to do that. I apologize.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But there were quite a number of them that stood out to me.
Yep. Anybody else have any other questions? And once again, you all have access to this. The URL to this website was in the presentation that Christina distributed to you guys. So you all have access to it. If you do go to the site and you're navigating through it and you have questions, anybody on county staff can help you all with any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Burnett. If you'll flip back over to the presentation.
Yep.
All right, we're going to turn it over to Keith Miller at this time to share part 3 of his presentation on property assessment in Buncombe County. Keith?
Thank you, Christina, and good evening, committee members. I first want to start with a couple of follow-ups from our last meeting when we talked about the random sample. Next. So I wanted to go back to a couple of these in the random sample and just revisit this tax rate question that seems to be coming up quite a bit. So we'll start in the bottom where you see the value times the rate equals the tax for 2021. So this is doing the comparison from the 2021 year after the reappraisal to the 2020 year prior to the reappraisal. So if you see, I took the 291,400 times the current tax rate for 2021, and that produced a $1,422 tax bill. If you go over then to the 2020, you see 188,900 times the tax rate that was effective for 2020, and you get $999 for the tax bill. So then I took the 291,400, which was the 2021, and used the old tax rate of the 52.9, and we got $1,542. And that would have been if the tax rate had not changed. So after the reappraisal, if the Board of Commissioners said we're going to keep the tax rate the same, then that would have been your new tax bill, $1,542. So the value. So now let's look at the next on the bottom, 102,500 or a 35% change in value. So you see that it went from 188,900 to 291,400. That's a 35% change in value for the reappraisal. However, the tax bill changed $500 or 30% for a tax increase. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out here is that the value of the 291,400 and the 188,900 is completely market driven. Okay, we have actually very little control over that. That's what buyers and sellers are paying for properties. That's what we've extracted from the market to say what this house should be valued at. The tax rate can change every year. That's controlled by the Board of Commissioners based upon the budget that we need. So that rate can change every year. So we are somewhat, that part of the equation, we are somewhat in control of every year of going up and down, but the value actually we just report. So I take data and we go through the statistical process, which we'll talk about later, and that's what it produces. Next. So the next one was the second example from that random sample. And this was a North Asheville home, which 2020 it was valued at $513,400, and the value changed to $546,300. So I went through the same exercise to show this to you, that the $546,300 with the new tax rate of 0.488 is a tax bill of $2,666. Okay, if you go on over to the right, the prior value to reappraisal, $513,400, the old tax rate of 52.9 was a tax bill of $2,715. If you'd used again the old tax rate for the new value of the 546, the bill would have been $2,890. Now, the other thing you can see here is that look at the relationship between all these is that if the value did change, the value didn't change, and the rate changes, what happens to that tax bill as it moves up and down? 32,900 or 7% change in value, or a $49 change in the 2% change in tax. Okay, here's the other thing I'll point out that I didn't say earlier, but you've heard me say before. A lot of people think, well, my value went up 20%, my bill's going to go up 20%. Neither of these examples did you see that. As you see on this one, the value went up 7%, the bill went up 2%. So the two does not always be equal, and most of the time will not be equal because of the rate adjusting. So I wanted to go back through this and give you a little bit more information about that rate and how it affects your tax bill and how the value affects your tax bill, what we're in control of, what we're not in control of, and show you the difference there and the change of how taxes can change at a different rate than value. So any questions on that? Okay, next. So why do we do a reappraisal? Next. North Carolina Machinery Act. The North Carolina Machinery Act is Chapter 105 of the North Carolina General Statutes that defines the mechanism of property tax in the state of North Carolina. Starts at the General Assembly, comes down then to the local governments all across 100 counties in the state of North Carolina to administer those tax laws. And those tax laws then get pushed out to the property owners. So this is the cycle. This is where it comes from. But what I want you to notice here, and I want to point out to you, is that as we move from the General Assembly part of creating the law, coming down to the local government of Buncombe County again has no authority to create tax law. Only at the state level can tax law be created and then passed on to the property owners. Next. North Carolina Machinery Act. This is just an example for you. Everything that we do and how we do it will come from this chapter 105 of the North Carolina General Statute. Just a couple examples for you that I gave there. 105-296 tells you what the powers and duties of the assessor are and what the charge is. 105-283 gives you the appraisal standards. 105-286 talks to you about time for general reappraisal. So everything we do and what we talk about that guides us from the state of North Carolina and the laws can all be found in this chapter 105, not laws that are created by local government. Next. And then the role of the North Carolina Department of Revenue. The North Carolina Department of Revenue is the state oversight agency for all 100 counties. They are the state agency that communicates with us. They are the state agency that we report to as far as state reporting on assessments and exemptions and these type of things. But the other thing they do is that they also publish the reappraisal standards. And in those standards, they give us guidance about the frequency of reappraisals, the type of reappraisal that we should do. I have to submit an actual written reappraisal plan to the North Carolina Department of Revenue when we're getting ready to do a reappraisal. They tell us about data collection, evaluation process, schedule values, education for assessors, notices and appeals. So most things that will change or in this reappraisal standards is developed by the North Carolina Department of Revenue to keep consistency across the state in all 100 counties. So what the North Carolina Department of Revenue is interested in is that when we do a reappraisal here in Buncombe County, or if you go to Wake County and they're doing a reappraisal, that we're all doing it basically the same, with the same methodologies, the same procedures and processes in place. They oversee that to make sure that that is in place, that anyone's being treated differently if you go from county to county across the state. Next. Then we talk about best practices. Best practices in assessment really comes best from the IAAO. You've heard me mention that before, International Association of Assessing Officers. It's a professional organization that's worldwide. All assessors and assessment offices typically adopt any of the IAAO standards and practices in which they publish. The IAAO says if you want to know what kind of practices that you have in place and do they meet best practices, then there's a process that every office can go through. And that is the Certificate of Excellence in Assessment Administration. Buncombe County went through this about a year ago. Takes about a year to go through it. There's about 12 different chapters that you're handed, and each chapter you have to report a narrative about how you approach the different topics such as management, technology, land records, staffing, education, data collection, valuation, appeals, and communication. We submit that narrative to the IAAO on what we are doing as far as practices here in this office. They take that and then they look at it, you know, compared to all across the world on who's doing what and what they think the best practices are, and do we meet those best practices. So we did achieve the Certificate of Excellence in Assessment Administration about a year ago. At the time, we were the third in the state of North Carolina to do this, and we're only about 26 jurisdictions across the whole United States who has met those that rigorous test of best practices in their offices. Next. So what do we do and how do we do reappraisals? Next. So let's go through a few terms here, just so as I go through some of the other slides, as I mention these terms and these words that you can understand what I'm talking about, because again, I've said to you before is that I may throw a word out there that may be some slang from appraisal or tax or assessment and not always realize that maybe I gave you a word which doesn't make any sense to you. So appraisal is simply an estimate of value. Now get the estimate, okay? Appraisal is not a science. It is an estimate of value. If you put 3 appraisers, if you give your home to 3 different appraisers out in the private world and said, all 3 of you appraisers, tell me what the value of my home is. What I'm going to say to you is that I can almost guarantee you that no 3 of those will be equal, because it's not a science. It's an estimate, and it's a lot driven by experience and appraisal judgment. Assessment is the taxable amount of the estimated value. So if I have an estimated value of $100,000 and I say the assessment's $100,000, then I'm paying tax calculated on that $100,000. Assessment can change, the taxable amount can change if you have an exemption on your property or something like that. Property tax is the amount paid to the county to support the services. Okay, so again, we're trying to separate in the terminology assessment, property tax, property assessment. So these words mean a little bit something more defined rather than us just kind of interchanging these words occasionally. So remember, tax is the amount paid. Property assessment, taxable amount of the estimated value. Tax rate, we just went through that, but I'll give you another example here, and this will stay in the slides when you get a copy of this. Tax neighborhood, a geographical area defined by appraisers for valuation purpose only. So we'll talk about this more as we get into the presentation also. Community, a geographical area defined by an appraiser for reporting purposes. A community is a group of tax neighborhoods that have characteristics in common. Next. Definition of property tax terms. So cost, sales comparison approach, income, market adjusted cost. So cost, sales comparison approach, and income are the 3 approaches to value that all appraisers use. It doesn't matter if it's in the private world or if it's in the government or what world you go to. These are the 3 methodologies that will be used to arrive at a value for your property. Cost simply means the cost to acquire the land plus the cost of the improvements minus any accrued depreciation. So cost is looking at what it would take to build that structure as it is today or replace it. Sales comparison approach. The value of the subject property is equal to the sales price of comparable properties. So you've heard me mention this one before, is that when people say, well, how'd you come up with the value of my property? The best way to know the value of your property is to look at your neighbors or people in your community to see what their homes are selling for. And you can have a good idea then what yours would be valued at. Income approach, mainly used for commercial income producing properties. Market adjusted cost, There's a hybrid approach, use cost and the sales comparison approach. And the market adjusted cost is really what we implement here, and most, if not all, appraisal offices use market adjusted cost. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we go along. Next. Reappraisal basics. A reappraisal is not an increase based on sales versus assessment study, but a process of appraising all parcels at market value. This gets back to some of the questions that come up about, well, did everybody just go up 10%? Does the assessor just, look at a number and say, hey, I'm just going to increase everything 20%? Well, that's not how it works. Appraising properties at market value creates different levels of assessment all across the county. The reassessment should be a standalone appraisal independent of any prior values assessed by the county. Prior value versus reappraised value, creating a percent change is irrelevant. Reappraisal creates a new value from scratch based on market data. So when people come to me and they say, well, how did my value go up 25% and my neighbors down the street only went up 10%? So again, it's market driven. It's about the property. It's about creating a new market value for each individual property. And they don't necessarily have to increase or have a percent change equal to one another. Tax assessment versus market value, when are they equal and when are they not? Tax assessment is a value estimate as of the reappraisal date. Market value is an estimate of value for any time given. So a little more on that. People will also come to me and say, so we had a reappraisal in 2021. Now we're in 2022. And people will say, well, Keith, my value's too low compared to what the market is today. Well, yes, that's probably true. And as the market appreciates, as we go past the reappraisal time and the market appreciates, then the values are going to change and the percent changes are going to change. And that's where you see the level of assessments start coming down. Tax assessment is valid for only one day in time, and that is the appraisal date. January 1, 2021 was the appraisal date, and that is the day that the value is certified as of. Once you get into 2022, the tax assessment is really no longer a market value for 2022. Now you're talking about market value. So they will quickly, in an appreciating market like we're in now, they will quickly become different over time. When you got a market that's appreciating, as much as 10% a year, it doesn't take very long for that gap to be established. Reappraisal or assessed value is an estimated value for one point in time. I keep saying that. So reappraisal, one point in time. We do not reappraise every year. If you sell your property and whatever that sales price is, we do not reappraise your property for that sales price. We cannot reappraise property in a non-reappraisal year. There's only a very few things in the statute that allows us to do that. We have to wait until the next reappraisal cycle in order to be able to change the value. Reappraisals are market driven. The assessor's task is to interpret the market, understand the story of the statistics they're providing, forecast the future market, and make a reappraisal recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. And this is what we've done for many, many years. Reappraisals are market driven. So in 2017, when I asked the Board of Commissioners, my recommendation would be to do a reappraisal. This was things that we based it on. Where's the market? Where's the market going? What's the statistic telling us? What does the future look like? And should we schedule a reappraisal to happen in 2021? And that proved to be true. As we moved along and the sales ratio became under 85%, then we would have to do a reappraisal anyway. So, but the point here is that it's completely market driven. And when I say market driven, remember what I mean by that is that what buyers and sellers are exchanging property for. That creates the market, and that's what's driving values in every city and county in the state or in the country. So next. What is mass appraisal? Mass appraisal is a method that is used to evaluate a group of properties as of a certain date. So as we go along and we talk more about neighborhoods and other things, keep in mind, again, mass appraisal is what all tax assessors use to value properties in every county. Whereas if you call somebody to come and do an appraisal on your house, an independent appraiser, they're looking at your house only, one structure compared to others in the neighborhood that may be comparable. So they're looking at one, I'll look at a group of properties altogether. And why do we do that? Next slide. So mass appraisal versus single. The county, we currently have about 130,000 parcels. We have 9 appraisers. So those 9 appraisers are assigned about 14,000 parcels per appraiser at a staff cost of about $375,000. If we did single property appraisals, if I had someone come to each and individual structure in this county and do an independent appraisal on those, our estimate would be, it would take 350 appraisers to be able to complete that task for a reappraisal at a cost of estimated $26 million. So now you see, this is why we implement mass appraisal. And this is why it's so important. Single property appraisal and tax assessment is not financially feasible. It is not the best way to do it. It is because of cost, because of staffing, and many other things. Next. So what are the steps? So number 1, we start with a schedule of values, which is the cost approach. 105-317, the statute says each reevaluation, the assessor must create a schedule of values. So what is the schedule of values? The schedule of values is a book, really. It's here in our office. It's online if you want to look at it. It's about 600 pages of documentation that tells you and every citizen how we do what we do and what we use to do what we do. Now, why is this important and why did the General Assembly think this was important? Is because, again, of equity across assessments. So the schedule of values says, if I have a 1,000 square foot average quality house sitting in East Asheville, and I have another one just like that sitting in West Asheville, is that the cost of those 2 structures will start at the same basis. So you can't create a difference in just because of where the location's at based on cost. Okay, so if it costs $100 a square foot to build it in East Asheville, we're saying it's $100 a square foot in West Asheville. And then we start adjusting based upon that. So if you remember, I said earlier, we use a hybrid approach, which is a market adjusted cost. We start with cost and then we adjust that based on location and the market. So that's the first thing that we do when we start a reappraisal, is to establish that book, the uniform schedule of values and standards and rules to be used in the appraisal of real property as its true value. And an assessor cannot deviate from that. If you deviate from it, then the property owner has a right to appeal that and show that you did and how you did not stay with a uniform schedule and create everyone equitably. Next. Number 2, land value. So land value starts with a sales comparison approach. We value your land and your lot that your house is sitting on as vacant land, and the land, we build land valuation models when valuing land for assessment purposes. The valuation models use size, location, rate per acre, and a size adjustment factor. So every parcel in a tax neighborhood uses the same rate per acre for purpose of equity in assessment and to comply with schedule values. So if you live in a subdivision, and we have that subdivision as a tax neighborhood, then every lot in that tax neighborhood will start with the same rate per acre. So if we have it at $50,000 per acre, every lot starts at $50,000 per acre. Then we start adjusting that $50,000 per acre for size, for location, for topography, all the things that would be associated with the value of that lot and what influences the value of that lot. We start adjusting that. Now, land value recently, some people bring land value up, but what I want to say here is that you've heard me say before is that we do not use land sales and Leicester to compare to East Asheville. We do not use land sales in North Asheville to compare to South Asheville. These are different areas. These are different market areas. These are different housing costs. A lot of things affect these different neighborhoods, and which is another reason we keep them defined. But we also, a lot of times, you'll see we've had the question about size adjustment. In some of these neighborhoods, size adjustment will create a different rate per acre in the end. So I could start with $50,000 an acre, but if you do the actual calculation on the amount by the rate or the acreage, you will see the actual effective rate per acre for every parcel. So there's a lot going on there. And I won't get any deeper into it than that, but there's a lot of things to consider with land valuation. We do not just say all the land in the city of Asheville is worth $50,000 an acre, because that's not true. And that is not the way to value vacant land. You have to look at each neighborhood independently to be able to understand what those are. The other thing to consider here is that in dense areas, in subdivisions, and city lots, we often do not rely on a rate per acre. We rely on a site value. Okay, so if you have a 0.15 acre lot in West Asheville that's sold for $100,000, then the rate per acre on that would be about $1 million. So we use more of a site value than we do a rate per acre to calculate those top lots in those top areas. Rate per acre is relied more on rural, large tracts of land. This is where rate per acre is applied more frequently and where we depend on that more than we do on a per lot basis. Next. Review parcels. So after we went through the cost, we've set the land value. Now we're going to start reviewing parcels. And how do we do it? So the first column on your left is from the air. These are some of the technologies that we have and we implement. We can see your house at pretty much a 45-degree angle, which allows us to zoom in. I can see the sides of the house. I can see the windows. I can see the doors. And then if you look below that, you see the two boxes there, which have the orange kind of polygons. This is a technology we call Change Finder. And what happens here is that the company that does these flyovers for us, next time we fly, we will do Change Finder. And what we do in Change Finder is that the company will compare the footprints of these houses. So they will look at the one that we flew in 2020. They will look at the one that we will fly in 2024, and they will overlay those two footprints to see if there was a change in it. If there was a change, they tell us what that is. You see in this picture here is that there was a swimming pool added. The trees were all cleared. And then the back of that house has a swimming pool or maybe a garage. I can't tell from this picture what it is, but there was something added to this parcel. From the street, we use a company also called Street Smart, which is cyclomedia. They drive the more densely populated areas for us. We get street level photography in which we can measure height, we can measure width, we can calculate square footage, we can calculate the wall area, many different things here. We can see the sides of the building, front of the building, and the other side of the building. As the car drives by, they take a shot every 15 feet from the camera. So we can see as the car progresses along, we can take a look at the structure. And then from the street, our appraisers put our feet on the ground, driving these neighborhoods, doing review. And then finally the boots on the ground, which we actually go to the house, knock on the door, talk to the property owner, maybe remeasure the house or what else needs to be done. Next. So then we collect that data. Data collection is one of the key components of any reappraisal. And when we have good data and we have accurate data, then we have accurate reappraisals. So we do have our staff appraisers, these pictures of our staff appraisers actually measuring houses here in Buncombe County. And we're doing this every day as far as collecting data, confirming data, re-reviewing data, whatever it might be that the task will be that day. Next. So I want to talk a little bit about why data collection is important. So you heard me mention before, the North Carolina Department of Revenue's appraisal standards includes a standard related to collection of data. And if you look in the left-hand column, you'll see the data collection methods: desktop, full measure, relist, walk around, street review. These are all the methods that could be done in a reappraisal to collect data. Then the North Carolina Department of Revenue, they select a sample. They give us a sample of properties they want us to visit. And when we go visit those properties, they give us certain things they want us to look at. And they want us to verify that data. So we already have the data in the system, but they're going to send us out again and say, remeasure this house, come back and compare it to what you've got in your system, and let's see how accurate you are. So desktop reviews or a full measure and list. Let's go to there. So a full measure and list on that left-hand column means you measure every improvement on the property and verify interior data. When the accuracy of the square footage is below 95%, it is required by the state. They will give us a recommendation that we do a full measure and list. It gets better as we go there. You know, they start dividing it up as the square footage gets above 95%, but the objective data gets below 95%. Then they'll say, well, you can do a walk around, which means a physical walk around every property to take a quick look. Or when the objective data is above 95 and the subjective data is 90%, then you can do a street review. Why is this important? Because a full measure and list, you know, in Buncombe County, we have about 90,000 improved parcels. So if we have to do a full measure and list, there's no way that we could do that with non-staff people. This will be a contract for a third-party contract. To do a full measure and list will cost the county $15 to $20 per parcel for 90,000 parcels. So you're looking at about $2.5 million to collect that data if we did not meet the standard. So our appraisers meet the standard. Next, I'll give you a little bit of the results on that. Is that the square footage data? And this was going up to the 2021 reappraisal. When we did the sampling for the state, the square footage data was at 98.79%. The objective data was at 96.88%. And the subjective data was at 98.36, which qualified us for a desktop review. Next. That data then is brought to the office and entered into our system. If you were here looking at our appraisal system, there's a lot of data components that we collect when we're at the property. We have the land, we have the size of the land, we have the owners, we have the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the construction type, the roof type, the year it was built, the basement, you know, is it a gable roof? Is it shingles? You know, what is the building type? What foundation was it built on? These are the things that the appraisers are collecting when they come to each individual property, and then they enter that into our system. And these are the things that we track about every property. You can see on the left bottom, that is a sketch of the house that you see in the picture. So someone was physically there. We measured that house. We sketched it. We identified what the house is, the porches, the decks, basements, anything else that's on the house, we identified for evaluation purposes. And then if you look over on the right bottom, you will see that house in an aerial photography. So we can look at the house from the air, we can look at it from the ground, we can look at it around, we can measure it, a lot of different things on that technology that we have. Next. Neighborhood delineation. So we've talked some about communities, and this is a map of the most recent communities that we have defined. Okay, now listen to that one, is that we, tax office, define these neighborhoods, and these communities are based upon census tracts all across the county. But for reporting purposes, what we found is that the citizens would like for us to report, especially in a reevaluation year or reappraisal year, they would like for us to report on communities, and they need to identify these communities. So if I say East Buncombe, or if I say Swannanoa, or if I say Sandy Mush, typically any citizen here in the county is going to know generally where that's at and how that relates. So that's why communities became important to us. Each community will contain many neighborhoods. Next. So this is a shot of the tax neighborhoods, which we also call market areas. These are not neighborhoods defined by anybody else other than tax. They're created for assessment purposes only. We don't There's no goal here to tell people what communities they live in or what neighborhoods they live in. This is for us to separate properties in market areas to value them together as groups of properties. So I give you a snapshot here of the map. You see all the colored polygons. This is actually Shiloh. And I don't know if you can, from the map, kind of make it out, but you can see Hendersonville Road kind of running down to the right side, north and east, or north and south on the right side of the polygons. And then you can see Sweeten Creek Road kind of cutting down through the polygons. So every color you see here is a neighborhood that we have separated for some reason. Now, if you look sort of in the middle, you see that kind of rectangle yellow shape, yellow colored area. Okay. This is the neighborhood that I think was referred to a couple of weeks ago by Ms. Bobette. And I'm sorry, Ms. Bobette, you can remind me of the name. It escapes me at the moment. But the point here is that these subdivisions in any community are separated out and valued only as their own tax neighborhood. So wherever Bobette lives down in this area means that unless she lives inside this yellow polygon, she is not being compared to it if she lives up in the purple polygon. That's how we separate these groups of properties and identify them as market areas. And you will see on here, there's some multifamily stuff. You will see, if you can determine where Sweeten Creek Road's at, you see the kind of blue purplish colors that goes down the street. Those are all commercial properties. Those are separated out into their own commercial neighborhoods. These other things, which were multifamily, or these are all separated into their own neighborhoods also. So,
Keith?
yeah.
I have a question. Are these market areas determined locally by your office, or is there another entity or standard for indicating these market areas?
No, there is no other entity, and there is no other standard of creating these market areas. What we do is we try and define them either by geographical areas, by platted subdivisions, by areas or communities that years that they were built, when they were generally a specific neighborhood all across the county, or is it an area of like properties? We are looking for a way to create these market areas. Then we take the market areas that we create, we put them in through the statistical analysis to see if they're actually comparable. When you have stuff then it's popping out as outliers, and you start looking at those and you say, well, this don't belong here, or we need to change this line to be like this and put this one over here because it more compares to the one to the north rather than the south. We have to determine that internally. We have no one that does that for us. Okay. The grid tells you the community. That's for the map that we just saw on the prior slide, is that if you look at Broad River community, that just tells you there's 39 tax neighborhoods or market areas within Broad River. Or you can go down that to Oakley. Oakley's got 67. Shiloh's got 31. So these are different market areas for whatever reason within these communities.
Keith, I have another question. Do the individuals that sit in any of those polygons, would they know that, this is the market area I sit in? Is there anywhere on the information that they receive in their tax bills or anything that indicates to them that I'm the same as my neighbor 2 doors down, or I'm not the same as my neighbors 2 doors down?
You can only see it on our website. We don't print that on the bills or the notices that we send you, because we feel like that it's probably not relevant to everybody. And if I send it to you, that you might not know or understand what it means. But you can get it from our website. It will give you a neighborhood code that you'll be able to look at your property and see the code. And then you can go to the neighbor and see the code. Do they have the same or not? This map, the snapshot of this map that you see here is also a new interactive map that we have built. And we'll be able to share that with you and with any citizen that would like to see it. It's a large map, and it can be a little cumbersome and it can be a little overwhelming to try and work with it, just because, as you see in that grid there, there's currently 2,493 market areas all across the county.
Keith, Bobette has her hand raised.
Yes, Bobette?
Yes, I have, it's twofold. First of all, you do consider the other side of Rock Hill Road that's going towards Oakley as part of Shiloh, right?
What you see here is this was pulled out as a community based upon the census tract. That northern part there, which I think you see is missing from this map, we do consider part of Shiloh.
Okay, that's the first question. The second thing is, sometimes we get where I live, ever since Forest Lake moved in, well, they developed over there, we end up sometimes being classified as being in Biltmore Forest over here where I live. And I don't know why, but it is, sometimes it's classified, or if on a map or something, that says, I had something from UPS and it said Biltmore Forest, North Carolina. And I wonder, why is that? I'm not understanding why it's like that.
Ms. Bobette, do you share a zip code with Biltmore Forest?
2803?
Yeah, that's why. It's because the zip code, you have the same postal zip code, you have the same post office as Biltmore Forest, and that's what I've heard before. Is that's the only connection that I know of. I
Okay.
do not have you in our tax system connected in any way other than by zip code.
Okay.
And
Okay.
zip code would only be used in our system to identify a location. It's not really used for evaluation purposes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Next. The next step is to build a sales database. This was the other approach that we talked about. We went through the cost approach. We looked at the neighborhoods. Now we're going to build a sales database and to use the sales comparison approach. And how do we do that? Ownership transfers from the Register of Deeds, 12,500 ownership transfers last year that come through our office. Multiple listing service. If you sold your property through a realtor and they are part of multiple listing service, then we're going to see that, and that's going to come through our system also. So we go and we look at that and try and qualify a sale. So what does that mean when I say qualify a sale? You will see two different sales in our system. If you did a data download from our system, what you're going to want is qualified sales, and they're identified in our system as either qualified or not. Not qualified would mean for some reason it was not a market transaction. If I bought a house from my brother, that would be a family transaction and we would disqualify that. We don't consider that to be a market transaction. If the house that you're buying was in distress, it was in foreclosure, or it was in an estate because of a death or something like that, those are not, we don't always consider those to be market transactions, and we take them out of the data. So those sales transactions are no longer in the database to be compared to anybody else's house. We also have properties sometimes that we think's too much, and we look at them when we say, well, this $1 million condo that's here in front of us on Market Street, it sold for $3 million. So how in the world could that be? Then we identify there's something here that we don't know. So the next step then would be send that owner a letter or do an interview with that owner and try and find out what happened in that sales transaction. Was there something included? Did they buy the house furnished? Was there something included with it that we don't know about? Was there a collection of cars that was included? There's a lot of things that can happen sometimes in these transactions. When we see that they don't make sense, then we follow through with it to go to the next step to interview the owner or send them a letter to see if they will respond to us to help us better understand it. This did come up, I think, in some of our meetings in the past. There was a question about, what we're comparing to. So this approach here, and what I'm saying to you about qualifying sales, is that just be assured, if we don't know anything about that transaction and it does not appear to fit in the market, then we are going to take that out of the sales database so we don't use it in valuing your property. Next. This is on our website. You can go here and look at your comparable sales. So the only thing you have to do is go, if you see up here in the left top corner, you see Comper, C-O-M-P-E-R, Comper-Buncombe County. If you go on our website and you open up Comper, you can type in your address. It'll pull your property up and you can pull the actual comparable sales to your property. And you can even see them on a map where they're located and how close they are to you. Next. This is what you would get from that system in a report. So you get the subject property, which would be your house or whatever address you typed in that you're searching for. And then it would give you the 3 comparables for that property and give you a range of value. You can see here for the comparable that was pulled, it tells you that it give you 3 comps. The sales prices were 292, 375, and 305. So if you can take and interpolate a number out of those 3 to come up with what a value would be for the subject. This is available to every citizen on our website. They have the ability to do this and look at it at any time. Next. Statistical analysis. This is the big component of finishing out the reappraisal. Once we go through the costs, once we build the neighborhoods, once we create a sales database, we start putting all that together. Then we start pushing every one of those 2,500 neighborhoods, one by one, go through a statistical analysis independently. Okay, so if I have a neighborhood that has 100 parcels in it from a subdivision, those 100 parcels get compared to each other and go through a statistical analysis independent of any of the other parcels that may be surrounding it. Next. This is something sort of what we look at. I'm not going to go into this, but statistical analysis and model building, we do this during a reappraisal. We look at scatter plots, we look at charts, we look at bell graphs, we look at histograms. Next. These are the things that our appraisers are looking at. We do statistical analysis on land value, build land valuation models. We pull data from the market and look at those to figure out size adjustments and geographical areas, different things that we may adjust for. But as you see, it's all based upon the market. We pull all the market data and put them into the analysis to create these formulas and these land valuation models. Next. The IAAO standards, you've heard us talk about this before, but I want to point out to you in the statistical analysis, we do use the IAAO standards. So if you look at the price-related differential, we'll just talk about the middle one, and that's looking at equity across the board on high-end houses and low-end houses. And what this analysis is doing is saying, what is the ratio on the larger houses, higher end houses versus what's the ratio on the lower end houses, and are any one of them overassessed, and who is overassessed? How much are they overassessed? This is the measure that we do to make sure there's equity across each neighborhood. We do that statistical analysis for each of the 2,500 neighborhoods, independently for each of the 2,500, not just as a whole, individually. And these, if we fall outside the standards, then each appraiser here knows it will be sent back to them and they figure out why, that it's not within the standards. So the PRD 0.98 to 1.03, and you can see Buncombe County as a whole came out at 1.005 after the reappraisal. But the point I want to make here is to not get in too deep of the statistics. It's to help you understand that every parcel, every neighborhood, every sales that occurs, every parcel that does not have a sale, we go through these analysis. They must meet a minimum standard or they do not move forward as far as sending the value out to the citizens. They will get stopped in our system and they will sit there until the appraiser or whomever figures out why that we're not meeting or within the minimum and maximum standards that the IAAO gives us. Next. So we've talked about this before, but I want to point it out again as we move forward. What is the sales ratio? You hear me talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot in this office. The sales ratio means a lot to us because, again, it is an expression as a percentage of the sales price and the assessment. It tells me if anybody walks in this office and says my sales ratio is 80%, then I know immediately that we are 80% of whatever the sales price was. So in this example, again, as I gave, I think some time back, If the property sold for $100,000 and I have it assessed at 80,000, then that creates a ratio of 80%. So the ratio then we take and do the analysis on. Next. This is an example of a neighborhood that we pushed through the analysis. So we took this South Side neighborhood, and you can see the street names: Park Square, Klingman Avenue, Klingman Place, Jefferson Drive. These are sales. And if you look over on the right-hand side, you will see the sales price, you will see the assessed value, the date that it sold. The Y means it was a qualified sale. But look over in the far right, you'll see the ratio. This ratio is what we're doing an analysis on. And these ratios tell us what the assessment is compared to the sales price. Okay. So you see in the middle, you got 97%. You see the assessed value is 306, sales price is 315. So I don't even have to know what the sales price is and the assessment is. The only thing I need to know is the 97%. I know the assessment is at 97% of the sales price. So it's a way that we can express the relationship between those two numbers and put them into our statistical analysis. Each neighborhood, again, I get this results for each of the 2,500 neighborhoods. And what this result here is telling us is that I circled count. You will see there's 8 sales that I pulled out here. And it tells me then the mean, the median, the standard deviation, coefficient of dispersion, the PRD. This is all the data that we look at for each one of those tax neighborhoods. Again, I'm continue to stress that every neighborhood, it doesn't matter if it's got 8 cells in it and it's 50 parcels, or if it's got 500 cells in it and it's 600 parcels, every neighborhood gets pushed through this analysis to make sure that those ratios are within the standards in which is created for us by the IAA. Next. This is one that we did for 1 million plus on countywide. So we can do them by neighborhoods. We can do them by specific property types. We can do them by range of values. So this is one that I did that I pulled out for, there's 29 sales here for the year of 2020 that were $1 million and greater across the whole county. And you can see that the mean and the median was 99% and the mean was 98.7%. Out of those 29 sales with a COD of 3. And again, I'm trying not to get too deep into this, but this is what we're looking for. This is acceptable to us. What we see here out of this statistical analysis of the 1 million plus homes is acceptable to us. Okay, next. This is countywide for the 2020 sales and assessment analysis. Count, there was 4,819 sales transactions that we had as qualified sales for the year of 2020 that we used for the 2021 reappraisal. You can see the median, which is the middle of the data set. So if you go there to 2,408 or 9 sales, in the middle, you would find the 0.986. But then the mean is the average. What is the average ratio among those 4,800 samples? And that's 98%. And I circle those two because what I also look at here is that when the mean and median are close, that should mean that the COD that you see there below the count should be within acceptable range, because it's telling me that we don't have a whole lot of outliers outside of the standards in which that we're looking for. Next. Define the analysis. Again, we won't go too deep here, but this is geared toward a little bit of central tendency. And you've heard some of that thrown around about central tendency. But when we're looking at the analysis, is that we're looking at this bell curve. And we're putting the data in an analysis to look at this bell curve. And what we are looking for is that 99% of the sample will be within the 3 standard deviations of the mean. So that, to me, means that we have a normal distribution and that this is what I would want it to look like. Now I'm going to show you in a minute what I don't want it to look like, but I want to point out to you something. You see on the right and left side, less than 90%, greater than 110%. These are the outliers that we always talk about. And they're always going to be outliers in this system. when you do valuation on mass appraisal and the statistics that we have in place, you will always have outliers. However, we look at these outliers. As we look at the snapshot of the data when we're looking at it and we see these outliers that fall outside the acceptable range, then the appraisers are looking at each individual one of those to try and figure out why they're out there. So we try and determine that to see if we've done something wrong. Do we have something listed wrong? You know, what it may be that we can fix it to make it better. Next. This is what I don't want to see. When we're talking about normal versus non-normal distribution of data. In the center, you see the yellow bars, that's a normal distribution of bell curve. And that means you're always going to have parcels that are not going to be at 100%. They're going to outlie and they're going to fall out, and you're always going to have outliers. But if you look on the right and left side, these will be non-normal. You have skewed, positive and negative skewed graphs here, which means that the data, there's something wrong in the data. And if I had an appraiser bring this to me and I was looking at the positive or negative skew, I would say, what happened? Because obviously in order to get that, you're not doing something correct or the data has been manipulated. In order to not have outliers in our system, the data would have to be manipulated, and we do not do that. We would rather deal with the outliers than manipulate the data. Next. This is what it really means. You see that bell curve, okay? We're trying to get as many of those properties to that center line as possible, or within that bell curve to be within those 3 deviations of the mean. But you see on each side, again, you have a certain amount of properties that will be on the outside of that, that will be overassessed or underassessed. Always going to have them. We try to minimize them. We try to look at them, but they're always going to be there. Next. Then we get into the end. We create a final value. We mail that value to the citizen, and the appeal process begins. Next.
Plunged by more than 100,000 since Omicron's peak and is projected.
This is on our website. We give a full explanation of the appraisal and assessment appeal process, what the citizen has to do, how they can do it, how they can be successful. Next. And then here's where you can file an appeal online. You don't have to come in our office. You don't have to call our office. You can go here, enter your parcel number, hit search. You will be taken into the system and where you can see those comparable sales if you want to create those that I showed you before. All that is here available to the citizen from our website. Next. Equity considerations, unbiased approach. Race, gender, age of property owners not considered in the appraisal process. Have it nowhere in my system. I have no idea who lives in these houses. I have no idea what their race is, their income, their gender, or anything else. Who lives in the house is irrelevant to us. What we're looking at is what properties were exchanged for between buyers and sellers. That's what means something to us. All taxpayers are eligible to appeal. If you feel the value is high or low, this is your way to be equitably treated. Come to us and tell us through the appeal process what you think is wrong. The statistical test is to assure equity in the assessments. Exemptions are available for qualifying individuals, elderly veterans, and the grant programs. Next. Questions. I barely ended up with 10 minutes. Anything anybody else wants me to go back to? Well, everybody is either completely educated or Miss Bobette.
Yes, I have another question. How does it impact? We have a situation off Swing Creek Road where it's a residential property, but there's a possibility that somebody wants to get rezoning to put up townhouses and condos and 4 houses or something. How will that impact the neighbors surrounding that area as far as taxes are concerned, if he does that?
Yep. So when that comes alive, that will become a tax neighborhood. We'll pull that away from all the other parcels in the neighborhood, and we'll create a tax neighborhood just for that development. Okay. So when we do evaluation, we're only using the sales within that development to compare to each other, and we're not using them to compare to you down the street somewhere as far as a sale. The only thing that could mean anything there for the neighbors would be the land sale. We will look at the land sale, and most likely we would compare that to any other development sites that may be in the area or any other like-kind properties. But that's really starts, Ms. Bobette, the creation of a tax neighborhood. Is when those developments start coming out of the ground and they're brand new, they're different, they have their own market. Okay, they would not be compared to anybody else.
Even if they're smaller, it doesn't depend on size.
Not going to be compared to you.
Okay, okay.
Or anybody else outside that tax neighborhood. Because when you say small, it just means they're going to be compared to the same small ones within the development.
Well, because that's what I'm saying. He already has. There's a house that had a lot of property to it. So he's going to take that house and put 4 houses up. And then he wants to, it's a large parcel of property. And then he wants to take the parcel and the part in the middle, he wants to get a conditional rezoning, because that's what he wants to put up 16 units. Now, so the neighbors are concerned because it's right on the backside of, these are neighbors I'm talking about, they own their own homes. And they're concerned of whether that will impact their tax with just that little bit.
And
No?
I really don't think so, Ms. Bobette, because we're not going to use that new construction to compare to those older existing homes that's been in the neighborhoods. We're going to want comparables of those older existing homes that have been in the neighborhoods to determine what those values are. Again, we will look at the land sale and see what that was about and compare it to other larger tracts of land that may be in the area. But, the only thing these new developments may have an effect on you is that, are they going to make your property more attractive to other buyers? Is it going to make a reason that somebody wants to live there? If so, maybe they'll start paying more for homes that are comparable to yours. But I want to assure you that I am not going to compare your house to those new houses that are being built in that development.
Yeah, because they are. It's all up because they're right there on. I know he's bought the front parcel that's on Sweden Creek that he's gonna make an office out of. But then he has to come up West Chapel, and that's where he was gonna do the other thing, and that hits right on the backside of Rock Hill. So it's a lot. They're trying to Sweden Creek. They're coming right on the backside of Rock Hill Road where we live, and the neighbors are very concerned because there's a funeral home that's going up, but the address will be on Sweden Creek, but it'll be on the back of Rock Hill Road. So it's a lot of things, development things that I think we don't understand. So maybe the next meeting that I go to, association meeting, then I will ask them to write down questions that they may want to get information. I think some of them will come to in person next time, but I will ask them what is it that their concerns are, because I feel like the only thing I can do is now I have to ask them, what do they want? You can't make decisions for people. When I look at them, I've known these people since I was a little girl, and I see them getting older, and I know they've paid for their houses. They've done the best they can to try to keep the houses up, and then they see all this other stuff coming up around them, and they just feel, just closed in and blocked in. So as much information as I can get. So I'll ask them, and I'll have those questions next time.
If you want to get some questions and send them to me, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay.
I'm always happy to even come. You invite me and I'll show up.
Okay. We will do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Keith, you may not be able to answer this, but this may kind of be what, Bobette's community is saying as well. Is there any power that they have or any recourse that they have around rezoning in their neighborhoods? Like, can they appeal that rezoning decision?
Well, I won't try to get into the planning department, but Ms. Bobette, I can try and get you connected there so you'll know exactly what you and that community can do. For rezonings, most of the time, the people that are adjoining within a certain radius get a letter to tell you something's getting ready to happen and give you the ability to attend a meeting if you want to. But I'll get you connected with our planning director and have them get some information out to you guys that It tells you a little bit more about that process, okay?
I appreciate that because, you know, the Charlotte Community Association, we really stay on top of stuff. And I don't think that the developer realized that how much that we were already engaged. So he's already done, he said he sent out letters. The people said they didn't get the letters. I think that was a little sign that you had to have a magnifying glass to see when he had actual public meeting. His next step will have to be, he'll have to meet with the community. And I think that the only thing that we don't want is the rezoning. We don't want the rezoning. We want you to put affordable houses instead of, because it's going to cause a lot of different problems for people over there. And they are concerned because those houses are probably, they say affordable, but affordable to us is, you know, you're talking about 400,000 plus is not affordable to the seniors in my community. So we are having those kind of issues, but I just want to make sure that I get the correct information when I take it back on if their taxes are going to, because they're already struggling. And some of them, they say they make too much money. They fall into that where they've made too much to be able to appeal it, they think. And I'm trying to get them to just say, well, you have to try. You have to go in there and try first. So it's not challenging, but it's just information for them. So if you could send me that information, whoever's in planning, so I can kind of like ask my questions on that too.
Yep, I will make sure to get you in contact with them so they can talk to you about that. But
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
you just said something I want to make sure, Ms. Bobette, that we weren't confused about, is that you just made a comment that they make too much money to appeal. Okay. Anybody can appeal. It's not based on income.
Yeah.
Okay. I think what you meant, they make too much money probably to qualify for an exemption.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay. All right. I want to make sure that was cleared up. Okay.
But that's why they don't want to appeal, because they say they make too much money and they don't feel like that they would get exemption or reduction. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ori has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Keith, for the presentation. I appreciated the information. I have one kind of very simple question. I know we've got 2 minutes left, but can you, for the sake of clarification, tell us again when property value may be adjusted between reassessment years?
Yep.
What I heard was if there's improvement done to the buildings, but are there other circumstances that may trigger changes to that value between reassessed years?
Yeah. So there's only a couple reasons, and that is a physical change to the property. So if you change your property in some way, now that doesn't mean maintenance. If you do a renovation, you put in new windows and new floors, a new kitchen, a new bathroom, or you add on an addition, this is a physical change to the property. Okay. If you put on a new roof, no, that's maintenance. So there is a difference there. So physical change to the property or a legal change. Now, a legal change would mean zoning. If you have a residential property that got changed to commercial, then we could revalue it due to that legal change. That's really the reasons that the value can change in a non-reappraisal year. And like I said, the statute's very narrow on that. That does not allow for a whole lot. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we
Ms.
have a,
Bobette, I'm sorry, Christina, but Ms. Bobette, let me also point out to you is that you might be talking about the city of Asheville rather than the county planning department, but I'll figure that out for you and make sure that I communicate with you, okay?
all right, with a minute left, is there anybody else that has any final thoughts, comments, questions? All right. Thank you. Good information. That was part 3 of Keith's presentation. We will be sending out the report from Tom DeVete and Savinia, the company that Tom works for, and we'll be sending that out hopefully by Friday so that you all can read that. Tom will come to present at our March 9th session that will be in person. Anything else, Burnett, you want to speak to about upcoming sessions?
No, not. I think that pretty much covers it for the time being.
Okay, great. So we'll send that report to you all Friday so that you all have plenty of time to review that before our next session. And I want to thank everybody for your time tonight. It was good to see everybody, even if it's virtual, and we hope to see everybody on March 9th in person. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.